Good morning. It's a wonderful possibility for me to introduce to you Tom Quigley, who many of you know already. Tom was for many years the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Policy Advisor on Latin American and Caribbean affairs. He was particularly involved with human rights issues that engaged much of the church in both Latin America and the United States during the 1960s. He gave much attention to Brazil in those early years, to the Southern Cone in the 1970s, and then to Central America, most especially in the 80s and 90s. Tom was a founding member of several organizations concerned with Latin America, including the Washington Office on Latin America and the Religious Task Force on Central America and Mexico. In recent years, he was also the advisor on Asian affairs for the Bishops' Conference, with a concentration on religious freedom issues as well as on human rights generally. Tom's expertise on Latin America is extraordinary, legendary, particularly on the church in Latin America. He helped the U.S. church understand and accompany the Latin American church as it moved to the side of those people living in poverty throughout the continent. He was present as part of an ecumenical delegation at the last homily that Archbishop Oscar Romero gave in the cathedral in March of 1980, and tragically just a few days later for his funeral. Tom's knowledge of the Latin American church, its prophetic personalities, and its institutional trajectory are a treasure of the U.S. Catholic Church. Tom?
Maria, I hope you send that to the person who writes my obituary. Some of it might be true. As we all know, our speaker today was born in one of the most marvelous cities in the universe, Havana, despite having fallen into dust during much of the last half-century of Castro neglect. He hasn't had much opportunity to live there, however, since his family left Cuba when he was 9 years old, and they moved to Spain, and then after a couple of years came to Miami, to Florida. He spent a year at the minor seminary, St. John Vianney, and graduated from what is today St. Thomas University in Miami. When the Augustinian friars were kicked out of Cuba and their university, Santo Tomás de Villanueva, was taken over by the government, the friars started Biscayne College in Florida back in 1961. In 1984, the few friars left decided to change the name of the growing university and proposed to call it St. Thomas of Villanova, or just Villanova, just as the school in Miami and Havana had been Villanueva. Their fellow friars up in Philadelphia, however, let it be known that if they went ahead with that name change, they would see each other in court. Ecce quam bonum notwithstanding. Miguel Diaz escaped to the Midwest and did his master's and doctorate in theology at Notre Dame, and then began a very successful teaching career with stops at Berry University, University of Dayton, and Notre Dame, as well as a stint as the academic dean at St. Vincent de Paul Regional Seminary in Boynton Beach. Along the way, he became known as one of the most outstanding and productive theologians in the country. He's been president of ACTUS, the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians of the U.S., and a board member of the Catholic Theological Society of America, and at least 4 of his books have been published by Orbis. I was asked to mention in particular On Being Human, U.S. Hispanic and Rahnerian Perspectives, published several years ago. I think it's 2001, but I think the reason for bringing it to your attention now was apparently Gene Kennedy had reviewed it for NCR. But what hasn't Gene Kennedy reviewed? Before being named ambassador to the Holy See, Dr. Diaz was professor of theology at St. John's University in Collegeville, as well as the College of St. Benedict. Together with his wife, Marion, they are the parents of 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. I've also been asked to call to attention the fact that the ambassador on September 8th at the embassy in Rome hosted Father Doherty and other Maryknollers for a reception there I'm struck by the fact that the 8th of September is a day that just passes here. It's between the 7th and the 9th. In Cuba and most Latin American countries, it's a very important Marian feast, and it's celebrated in Cuba despite all the pressures against the church there. There's a story which two of Ambassador Diaz's predecessors as ambassador have told me is false, but which I heard a long time ago and from a good source, so I continue to believe it. It seems that when President Reagan managed to get his friend from California, his golfing buddy, William Wilson, named as his personal representative to the Holy Father, Wilson was more than a little miffed when on formal occasions he had to bring up the rear at receptions or presentations to the Pope, following ambassadors, extraordinary and plenipotentiary, from countries much smaller and obviously less important than the United States. It was especially galling that the dean of the Vatican Diplomatic Corps at that time was that rascal from Cuba. He had been sent there by Batista and left there by Castro, and simply by building up seniority to the point that he became the dean of the Diplomatic Corps. Wilson's efforts with Reagan resulted finally in the Congress granting full diplomatic status to the personal representative, thus making him, Wilson, in January 1984, the first of now 9 U.S. ambassadors to the Holy See. What may be taken as poetic irony, we now have the first Cuban and the first theologian to hold that post. It's a great privilege to welcome to Maryknoll His Excellency Miguel Humberto Diaz, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to the Holy See. Miguel.
Grazie mille. There was someone there. I've been told I should change the schedule for this afternoon. We are here for 3 more hours, more or less. I want to begin by thanking Father John and the Maryknoll family for this opportunity to celebrate with you the 100th anniversary of the founding of Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers. I am deeply honored and humbled by your invitation to address you on this important anniversary. I come to you from the eternal city of Rome as the 9th U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. I also come to you as a pseudo-member of the Maryknoll family, given my various publications with Orbis Press and the numerous friends that I have associated with Maryknoll. On behalf of President Barack Obama and our U.S. mission to the Holy See, I greet and congratulate you on your centennial anniversary. As it was just mentioned, this is an ongoing celebration for me with Maryknoll, since I was just last week on September the 8th with the Maryknoll family in Rome. And at that point I said to them, I'm working overtime for Maryknoll. And I told the superior, how come you're not coming with me to New York? We need change we can believe in. And let me start off with, first on a light note, and then I'll go on and make my comments. Since my arrival in Rome, one of the most oft-used comments that I find quite interesting is, ma questo non è possibile, l'ambasciatore americano parla italiano. And then I respond in French or something like that. And, oh my gosh, he's multilingual. He can actually speak different languages. Some months ago, during Lent, I was doing the Stations of the Cross churches in Rome. And there was a group of Americans who were there that morning. And when the Mass ended, we were walking out, and I could overhear behind me the group saying, is it true that the American ambassador speaks Italian and several other languages? And I could hear someone say, yeah, it's true, he's actually multilingual. And I couldn't resist. I just turned around and said, yes, that's change you can believe in. That is why I accepted the President's request to become the 9th U.S. ambassador. And change is also the reason why I said yes to be here with you today. Because I know that I am among agents of change. And so my comments this morning, a Knoll for all, rethinking the common good. The story of Our Lady of Guadalupe, also known as the Nikam Mapawa, recounts a 16th century faith encounter on a sacred hill between Mary, the mother of Jesus, and a dignified Amerindian named Juan Diego. The story highlights the mission of this woman who has been sent as God's envoy to challenge social injustices, empower marginalized persons, and create a community, a dwelling place, a home where all could coexist and share God's abundant blessings. Similar to other religious narratives of the human family, the story of Guadalupe carries profound social, political, and religious implications. This religious narrative has precipitated numerous reflections on the nature of human relations and has inspired multiple actions on behalf of the common good, both within and outside various parts of the American continent. There is a story on another American landscape connected to a hill or mound named Maryknoll, located about 50 kilometers north of New York City. And like the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the story of Maryknoll is one of outreach to and empowerment of the poor and marginalized. 100 years ago, Father James Walsh and Father Frederick Price embarked on a common journey that would take their followers on mission to various parts of the world, especially Asia, Africa, and Latin America. From just a few members, the Maryknoll family has grown in number and diversity. Throughout its history, Maryknoll has been deeply committed to advance the common good. And for the Maryknoll family, this work on behalf of the common good has meant ministry for the sake of social justice, peace, and the integrity of creation. Today, I want to share some reflections on the common good. More specifically, I want to argue that the question of diversity, the issue of how to include and empower others and their God-given otherness, is one of the most pertinent questions facing the human family. Our efforts to pursue justice, peace, and the integrity of creation will not fully succeed unless we are able to persuade others of the indispensable value of diversity and the ever-present need to create communities and nations that welcome and contribute democratically and include the participation of all of its members. In our efforts to achieve the common good, we must resist destroying social unity by equating oneness with sameness, on the one hand, or on the other hand, by isolating or marginalizing particular individuals and communities. In many ways, many ways, the age-old question of how to bridge the one with the many remains very much alive. And so in what follows, I will offer some reflections on the common good from social, political, religious, and philosophical perspectives. First, I turn to one of our most basic American foundations, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. I explore what this principle might teach us today about the common good and the question of diversity. Second, I turn to recent Catholic teaching and philosophical arguments to deepen reflection on the common good and its relation to diversity, especially when it comes to including marginalized communities and their distinct otherness. E pluribus unum, the common good in social-political terms. A perusal of our daily news suffices to reveal how issues of justice and peace are directly related to issues concerning human differences. Whether we speak of political, cultural, religious, gender, or other human differences, we often find communities torn apart as a result of their inability to creatively and constructively approach these differences. This challenge to address human differences has only but increased during a time characterized by the ongoing displacement of peoples. As a result of natural and human causes, the International Organization for Migration estimates that there are well over 200 million displaced persons on the face of the planet. The exposure to human differences that comes with this presence increases the need for conversation and action related to the social question of human diversity and inclusion. As the Catholic Foreign Mission Society of America, as a religious community deeply rooted and shaped by the Catholicity of the Church and the Catholicity of the U.S. landscape, you have been witness to one of our most basic American foundations, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. Your missionary actions come out of a very diverse nation and flow to and among a very diverse people. If I may be allowed to paraphrase the late Karl Rahner, you have witnessed the manifestation of grace in many possible forms and in many historical spheres and contexts. On numerous occasions, President Obama has drawn attention to the fact that as a nation, quote, we are shaped by every culture, drawn from every end of the earth, and dedicated to a simple concept, e pluribus unum, out of many, one, end of quote. This basic American principle affirms that rather than melting away human differences should be welcomed as a way to form a rich tapestry in which different threads come together to create the beauty of the whole. The unum, we Americans esteem, presupposes mutual, interdependent, and diverse parts. It requires that stakeholders within any community or nation see themselves as distinct yet essential parts of the social body. In this sense, a person's, community's, or nation's actions at any given moment will always necessarily reflect a certain degree of particularity and bias, whether social, political, geographical, racial, gender, or religious in nature, to name but a few of our human experiences. However, desire for the common good would require that such actions, though stemming from contextual concerns, be carried out always for the sake of the good of all. While this American principle is not a blueprint for creating social political policies and actions, it can continue to serve as a signpost for advancing issues of social justice and peace. Given the nature of pluralistic and democratic societies and the diverse points of view encountered within them, conflicts among individuals, communities, and nations can be expected to emerge. To resolve such conflicts in a way that advances the common good, this American principle suggests that every effort must be made to avoid interpreting unity as sameness, imposing a false sense of unity, or rupturing unity through policies and or practices that cause any particular person, community, or nation to exist as an island over and against others. And I'm always reminded here of Thomas Merton's famous words in book, "No One is an Island." Finally, in my view, this American principle also carries implications not only with respect to embracing and incorporating what is human, the human, but also with respect to preserving biodiversity for the sake of the health of the planet, of human creatures, and all other creatures. Out of the existence and preservation of many creatures and species comes the survival of our planet. In this sense, Norway's Seed Vault project, which presents an unprecedented global effort to protect the planet's rapidly diminishing biodiversity, offers an example of the kind of actions that the human family can take to preserve and defend diversity on our planet. The common good, diversity, and contemporary religious voices. Most people would agree that the pursuit of the common good cannot be separated from the pursuit of justice. If you want peace, work for justice. An argument often associated with Pope Paul VI. Increasingly, as a result of the mounting evidence related to the adverse effects of climate changes, many persons would concur with Pope Benedict XVI, oftentimes referred as the Green Pope, when he links the promotion of the common good with the protection of creation. Addressing us diplomats last year, he said, if you want to cultivate peace, protect creation, end of quote. But as I have argued, the signs of our times beckon us to retrieve the age-old debate of how to relate the one with the many in the service of the common good. Numerous religious leaders working in the area of interfaith conversations have offered profound philosophical and theological contributions that can help us. They can help a wide range of communities and individuals and nations reflect upon, embrace, advance notions of diversity. And I'm thinking of, leaders as diverse as John Susulas, Miroslav Volf, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Pallavicini, to name just what a few across cultures, traditions, etc. These religious leaders have called for an epistemological shift to occur. Big word. That is a new way of seeing and knowing that privileges and prioritizes human differences. Rather than being a call to abandon our particular social, cultural, gender, or religious contexts, this way of seeing requires that we sharpen our vision and delve more deeply and honestly into those places from which we stand and interpret the world that surrounds us. As an example of how this turn to our own otherness, our own particularity, our own difference, provides a way to encounter others and their otherness, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs writes, and I quote, "Because because we know what it is to be a parent. Loving our children and not children in general, we understand what it is for someone else, somewhere else, to be a parent, to love his or her children, not ours. End of quote. Recently, Carmen Nanco Fernandez, a leading voice among Latina scholars here in the U.S., has offered some very valuable reflections into the question of diversity and the central issue of how to bridge human differences without falling into the trap of homogenization. She looks at diversity through the threefold lens of difference, commonality, and hybridity. With respect to human differences, she cautions against, one, an oversimplification of diversity that fails to account for multiple belongings of particular persons and communities. To give an example, some of us, U.S. Hispanics, can celebrate both African American Heritage Month as well as Hispanic American Heritage Month. Why? Because there are a number of U.S. Hispanics that have un pie de cada lado, a foot on each side, both in terms of the African continent and in terms of the Hispanic continent. This past summer, Marian and I, my wife, took our family on an exploration of our two cultural, American cultural traditions, heritages. On one side of the family, the Hispanic American heritage, both Cuban American and Spanish. So we took the family to Spain. On the other side of the family, she's Croatian American, we wanted to explore the Croatian American heritage. While in Spain, I visited Al-Andalus and went to the great city of Córdoba and walked the streets of Córdoba and remembered and pondered and reflected upon what was once an experiment in intercultural and interfaith relations. But clearly, multiple belongings is central to this question. Nanco also cautions against, two, forgetting the asymmetric character of power and relations that can prevent any community from critical confrontation of its own ethnocentric biases and tendencies. We all have homework to do with respect to our own histories, families, etc. Three, failure to recognize internal social-political differences within any particular community that can result in exclusion and internal othering. So again, there's that tendency to sameness even within a particular community. And four, recognizing that human differences exist. Oh yes, of course, I'm a strong advocate of human differences and diversity. But only when it comes to others and someone else's otherness and diversity. I'm not really part of that diversity. The diversity is outside of me. I'm not different in that sense. For Nanco Fernandez, our ability to be one, yet diverse, emerges out of our shared and multiple human belongings. Each of us carries the ability to identify points of intersections with others and weave connections within the mosaic that is the human family. At the same time, we must recognize and overcome those accidental or willed human experiences that have kept us from participating in and contributing to the benefit of the many. John Zizoulas, a leading voice within Greek Orthodox Christianity, has explored the theme of how fear of others in their otherness has been pathologically ingrained in human beings, especially in contemporary times, and how we have often identified difference with division. While his arguments are indisputably rooted in the Christian theological tradition, they offer valuable insights for believers of other faith traditions and unbelievers alike. Central to Sisula's argument is the notion that otherness is inconceivable apart from relationship to others, and that otherness is constitutive of unity and not consequent upon unity. Let me say that again. That otherness is constitutive of unity and not consequent upon it. This affirmation leads Sisula to embrace a relational understanding of human persons that presupposes openness to and inclusion of the other in his or her otherness, distinctiveness, God-given difference. In his latest encyclical Caritas in Veritate, Pope Benedict XVI also underscores this view of human persons as interdependent beings and the need to affirm this interdependence for the sake of realizing the common good. The Pope argues that, quote, the Christian revelation of the unity of the human race presupposes, and then of course he uses a big philosophical term now, a metaphysical interpretation of the humanum. So a foundational, a most basic interpretation of the human in which relationality is an essential element, end of quote. Rooted within Christian notions of God, in the nuptial understandings of persons in communities, the Pope affirms that openness to others does not mean loss of individual identity, but profound interpenetration of the other. As a missionary community, the Maryknoll family is perhaps more familiar with attempts to relate notions of what it means to be human with contemporary missiology, understandings of mission. In this regard, the groundbreaking work of Steve Bevins and Roger Schroeder deserves to be mentioned. Among other things, these contemporary reflections also invite human beings to understand themselves, to understand ourselves as contextual and as missionary creatures. To understand this missionary stance as creatures in relationship to others, and to responsibly, ethically embrace the diversity that surrounds us. Simply put, I quote, to be human is to be engaged in a mission humanitas, a movement of responsibility, solidarity, and mutuality to and from the other. This kind of emphasis on the emphatic movement dynamism of the human person that defines human beings as missionary beings, as persons who exist and exit, dynamically and oriented to reach out to others, I think has much potential to advance the common good today. The challenge for religious leaders like yourselves or diplomats like me is to be able to translate these ideas for a wider public, and more than translate theoretically, turn them into particular actions. Translating thoughts into action. I started my reflections today relating the story of Our Lady of Guadalupe with the story of the Maryknoll community. I noted how a mission to the marginalized and a desire to create inclusive community tie these two narratives together. I also pointed out how the roots of Maryknoll lie in both the Catholicity of the Church and the rich diversity that characterizes our American society. Undoubtedly, these contexts have shaped your identity and have inspired you to serve in many countries around the world, including, of course, Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Your origins and ongoing ties to the rich and diverse American experiment that is the United States of America, and your charism as a Catholic missionary religious community offer you a unique possibility to promote throughout the world a unity among the members of the human family that is deeply attentive to and respectful of human differences. As a diplomat, as the ambassador, as your ambassador to the Holy See, I am firmly convinced of the important contribution that religious leaders can make to advance the common good. Diplomats need religious leaders, and religious leaders need diplomats. They need one another to translate valuable ideas and conversations into effective actions. All too often, we find ourselves carrying valuable in-house conversations that fail to produce real results because we have not sufficiently and adequately translated or communicated in ways that can be understood and embraced by those around us who might come from different social, political, cultural, or religious landscapes. The story of Guadalupe, it's all about translating words and actions into particular contexts. It is about communicating with the other and his or her distinct otherness in ways that can be fruitfully received. The Nahuatl culture, the Nahuatl language, flower and song, all of these are ways that were contextual signs for the recipient people. In this story, Juan Diego responds to the hearing of song of birds and to the seeing of flowers, two important symbols of his Nahuatl culture. He hears these words at Tepeyac Hill, a place considered sacred by his ancestors. And most importantly, the story of Guadalupe offers valuable information for all of us who want to transform oppression and violence into opportunity and peace. The story invites humans to foster co-responsibility, solidarity, and mutuality with others and their distinct otherness. As Maryknoll continues to reflect upon his past 100 years of missionary actions and looks forward to the next 100 years, I invite all of you, I invite myself to join and help multiply worldwide the work of translating valuable ideas into actions, whether these ideas come from secular or religious origins. Our mission to the Holy See has been very busy trying to open spaces that enable diverse leaders and audiences to interact with one another. A series of conferences in the last 2 years intended to build bridges among diverse faith communities and among diverse segments of society offer a model for advancing the common good. In these conferences, we have listened to the contributions of particular communities and have called for and witnessed the translation of such ideas into specific actions and policies. As an example, we just had a conference on anti-trafficking in the spring that led to some legislation in Washington in terms of anti-trafficking and the protection of human persons on the move. Your experience over 100 years contains a treasure trove of recipes for interpersonal conversations and actions on behalf of the human family. The priests, sisters, brothers, lay volunteers of the Maryknoll community have committed their lives to the type of response and action that I am calling and inviting all of us here today. Your witness of lives sacrificed daily on behalf of the other reveals a fount of fortitude and compassion. Your ability to serve persons in distant corners of the earth and from all walks of life often exceeds our government's reach. You help enable our own work of those most in need. The communities you have founded throughout the world are heirs to the community you founded here 100 years ago. All of them watched around the world, and this community serves as an example of what have oftentimes been characterized as American exceptionalism. In this age of interdependence, governments need religious community like these, like your own, to increase greater appreciation of the diversity of the human family and to multiply human efforts to pursue the noble objectives of justice, peace, and the integrity of all creation. I want to thank you for this invitation to speak to you today. Again, receive my heartfelt congratulations on your centennial celebration. I wish you much success in the next 100 years of service to persons, communities, and nations around our world. May your missionary work on behalf of those who suffer most continue to transform hearts and minds. May others imitate your example to create a knoll for the sake of serving all of God's creatures. And may God continue to bless the Maryknoll family in our country, the United States of America.